Hey everybody, it's Pete Toll, aka PT Sports 84. So I got a request this morning to do a video regarding player tendencies. Got a little bit of time today. Not as busy as I thought I'd be today with some work stuff, so I got a free little bit of time window here to kind of go over something. I don't know that many people know this, but 2K actually updated the player tendencies based on the 2022-2023 NBA season. Um, if you go to the default rosters that came out of the box and look at the tendencies, they were based off the 2021-2022 NBA season. 2K didn't update those once the game came out. But about 2 weeks ago, they were able to drop in a player tendency update that's vital to gameplay as well as simulation stats. The only problem is some of the tendencies are geared more towards gameplay than they are sim stats, and so some of the sim stats are kind of messed up a little bit in some areas, or I shouldn't say messed up, overinflated or underwhelming for some players in some areas because they geared it more towards the gameplay side of things than the sim stat engine. Some of that could be the engineering and the way that they code the game, write the scripts, things like that. I'm not 100% sure on that side of things. I only know the gameplay side of how things work more so than anything else. But anyway, if you look at players down the roster, you can look at a couple things. I want to go through each of the tendencies and kind of let you know how they affect gameplay or how they affect sim stats to the best of my knowledge. Now, my knowledge is only good up until last season or last game, which was 2K22. I haven't been able to strip down the game and test tendency by tendency yet for 2K23. So there might be a little bit of strength in some areas um, versus some like some that got nerfed, some that basically got buffed as far as tendency strengths. I'm not 100% sure. I want to clarify that. I'm not 100% sure of the differences for 2K23 in each of the tendencies. Now, there's a few that I have tested, like shot tendency, touch tendency, the 3 point tendencies, things like that, that I am sure of what the changes are. And to be honest, the strength of the tendencies has not changed since last season. You just have to put the correct values in for the correct scaling of players to get proper gameplay and as close as you can to sim stats. More than likely, the sim stats won't 100% line up to accurate gameplay as well. And that's just how it's going to be. You got to pick one or the other, close enough sim stat wise and more accurate gameplay, or less accurate gameplay and spot on sim stats. You're not going to get both 100% accurate. Now, with that said, let's go through some of the tendencies. What this shot tendency does is it is a simulation stat based tendency. It tells the player in game whenever it's simmed, as far as, I guess, the simulation based AI, how often a player should shoot once they have, once a play is called, things like that. Um, for gameplay, what determines a player getting a play ran for them and how high, I guess, their points per game potentially could be is the touch tendency. As you can see here, the two highest players that score on the team are Joel Embiid and James Harden. Um, for the 76ers. Now, in my opinion, I would have bumped Tyrese Maxey up a tad and bumped down Tobias Harris, but they kind of left it as is because it's close enough. You can just increase Maxey if you're not seeing the necessary gameplay stats that you want. Um, I would have made a few other changes as far as this goes just to clean it up a little more. like Julian Champagny should have been dropped down. Um, just personally, like minor, just very minor touches, like Montrezl Harrell dropped down a tad, like nothing that like is out of this world for the Sixers that are wrong. I just like just to do little small tweaks here and there for accuracy. Now a lot of people get these confused. The shot close tendency, the under the basket tendency. Um, Basically how 2K scales these, you cannot go on Basketball Reference and look at the data and then pair it 100% because 2K uses a different chart based off of NBA.com. They kind of look at it from like 3 to it should be like 3 to 9 feet, but it's more so like a variation of coupled areas for them. Under the basket stat is like dunks and things like that. And then the mid range is the 15 feet to up to 24 feet. But what's weird is 2K also integrates in some of the close shot stuff. It's just interesting how they pair these together. They use kind of their own data scale, so it's hard to 100% scale these per what 2K uses because they pull their data from multiple sources, so to speak. I try to go off of, a basis of, what the NBA.com mid-range stats are and go from there. And you got to look at volume as well. Like if a player's shooting a ton of them versus not shooting them, things like that. Putting it down as far as to zero is tough too. Derek Spina, so under the basket shot is different from shoot from the post. Yes. Under the basket is like dunks and things like that. The shoot from the post tendency is how often they will shoot in the post. So you never want to zero a player out in that category, so to speak, right? Because if you zero a player out and shoot from the post, if they get stuck down in that area and the shot clock's running out, they won't take a shot. They're just going to stand there and not do anything or keep backing you down, whatever the case may be. So you always want to have a minimum one in that category so they do something. But obviously the higher range players that are going to shoot from the post need to have a bigger shot window, as far as the tendency goes and what they're going to do in the post. Let me get to the post tendencies and I'll show you. As you can see, Embiid has a 99 shot from the post. James Harden's not really going to shoot from the post because it's not what he does, but you want to have it at like a 10, or I like to put it at a minimum 5 for guards, just so they can throw up a shot if they need to at the end of the shot clock, things like that. So that way it just makes it easier across the board to scale those. I don't, I kind of scale mine differently just because in each of these categories, as far as the post tendencies, I'll go ahead and touch on those since I'm already in this area. I don't like to put anything over a 25 in the categories unless they're really proficient at that particular area. Like a post hook or, a fade, things like that. I don't like to have those at a high value over 25 unless that's something they do really well or do a lot of, I should say. Because if a player's not really using that move, then I try to zero it out. Like, for example, like a Montrezl Harrell is not going to do a post hop step. So this is accurate having a 0. He's not going to do a step back shot. He's not going to do a shimmy. Like, so these are accurate here. And then the up and under, he's not really going to utilize that much, but he can do it. So yes, perfectly having it at a 20 here. That's great. I would have lowered his post fade personally, just because that's not something he does a lot of. But let's go back to the beginning of the tendencies just to show you some other areas of them. So you have these mid range. This is the SimStat version, and then the spot up mid range and the off screen mid range are the gameplay versions. If a player is somebody that doesn't spot up, like this is not the 1990s, you're not really going to see many players spot up from this area. But I'll explain something in a second. So guys like Julian Champagny should be down to 1 because he's not spotting up from the mid range. Um, but in the unique case of Joel Embiid, you need to have spot up mid range at a 25 because he shoots those little pull up mid ranges. So you need to have a minimum of 25 on the spot up mid range in order to activate that pull up mid range jumper that he likes to do a ton, actually too much, I think. But you also have to set your other categories to coincide with that as well. When you do that, you want to have triple threat shoot at a 75 or greater for that reason that he's in that triple threat and he's going to be able to like pump fake or jab and then do the little pull up that he does as far as that mid range shot. So those coincide with each other. If you're like a Jokic or you're an Embiid, like that mid range shot as a big, you need to work in your triple threat shoot along with that mid range shot. That's the rare case that you see a mid range spot up, and that's the reason why that should be up higher. Now, a player that doesn't, like a Furkan Korkmaz, you want to have it at a 1 because if he's ever stuck in the shot clock situation, something like that, on a rare case he gets stuck on a screen or something like that, you want to be able to have it at a value that at least he could shoot it, if not, you know, basically just being stuck for nothing. I personally like to put him at 0, but I've not really seen a difference between 1 and 0 as far as the shot clock going for the spot up part. Now, I have seen it for off screen mid. You don't want to have a big that doesn't shoot from the mid range have an off screen mid. Because if you have it anything higher than a 0, that shot's going up more often than it should, even at a 1. So you want to make sure that's all the way down. Now, guards and wings, you want to make sure that you have these scaled appropriately, which it seems like they've done a lot better job this year of fixing the tendencies, getting them touched up for the most part. Now, there's a few inaccuracies, like you're not going to see Daniel House launching off-screen mids constantly. That's just not how he plays. They've got to touch those kind of small things up. But for the most part, I'm not going to sit there and tear them apart and nitpick because the tendencies are the best they've been in a while. They're not perfect. I'm not advocating saying it's 100% perfect. Anybody that's worked on tendencies knows it's a tedious job. The 2K developer that is in charge of them contracts out to a third party, which means it's somebody at home, like you watching, myself recording. Somebody at home is inputting these in their spare time, which means that they get to them when they can get to them and they have the data available that's available. It may not be 100% fresh, up-to-date data all the time, but I'd rather have an update that's, 80%, correct with changes rather than nothing, like we saw for, previous versions of the game, or lackluster updates, so to speak. Same thing with these tendencies, these shot mid, right center, all these are gameplay tendencies, how often a player is going to shoot in that particular area, or SimStat based, I should say, area. I don't ever really touch these. If you really wanted to be like precise, you could get into those and really update those. I personally don't, just because it never really was something I wanted to do time management wise and then functionality wise as far as the gameplay side of things. So no, Derek, if your spot up is too high, does it affect your dunk tendencies? No. I'll get to that in a second, how that kind of works. Um, shot three tendency, this is a sim based stat. The spot up and off screen are the gameplay stats. Now, as a point guard, you don't want to have these too high. Um, like, as you can see, like some of these are a little bit much. Like the spot up is fine. The off screen, you don't want to have it super high necessarily. I think that's too high for DeAnthony Melton. I would have knocked him down. There's too many 99s in this category unless you're somebody like a Georges Niang that's just standing in the corner. You can get a 99, and basically you're just going to spot up and shoot it. I think my personal preference for guards that move around, whether it's point guards, two guards, wings, I don't like 99 unless that's all you do, because they're going to take like shots out of nowhere and jack those shots up a lot. So I like to tone those down, especially DeAnthony Melton. I think a 75 would be just fine for him, maybe even lower, to be honest. Again, these are sim stats. Any of the things that you see T slash, the S3L, S3LC, those are all, those stats. These two, contested mid and contested three, are both sim stats and gameplay stats. How often a player shoots when contested, how often they're going to shoot those particular two shots. Step backs, they rescaled about 2 years ago. These are how often a player will step back. I personally don't like to go over 75 for most players unless it's, a play that they're going to do a ton. I don't agree personally with Maxey being a 75 and Harden being a 65. I think Maxey could have went down as well. They did knock James Harden from a 99 like 2 years ago back down to a 65. You can see they rescaled him because it was triggering a step back every single time he shot. Now the way he plays, it's not a guarantee. Most times, yes, he's going to shoot a step back, but it's not a guarantee, so they were able to rescale those. Spin jumper is a gameplay in SimStat tendency. The spin jumper, you'll see high on players like Embiid and things like that kind of get like a turnaround shot, things like that. Transition pull-up three, self-explanatory. This is gameplay. This is how often in a transition play a player will pull up and shoot a three. Guys like Lillard and Curry and things like that need to have that high, but unless you're a high trigger guy, this is the category that you want to keep relatively low, as seen here. Same with drive pull-up mid-range, drive pull-up three. This is how often on a dribble drive they're going to be able to shoot off of shots. Now, the reason Embiid is a 65 here is because he is able to take a dribble on the floor and then pull up and shoot. It's not necessarily driving to the basket per se. It's just dribbling and then pulling up and shooting on that. Now, next is the drive tendency, spot up drive and off screen drive. These spot up drive and off screen drive need to pair with not only the pull ups, but they also need to pair with the spot up mids and the spot up threes. You have to get all of these interworking together, because if a player is primarily a guy that pump fakes and drives and doesn't shoot threes, then this value needs to be high, the spot up drive, things like that. If a guy is coming off of screens and then driving to the basket, this needs to be high there to get to the basket. This 75 for Montrezl Harrell is because if you pin his guy that's defending him on a screen, he can drive around him and dunk. And that way it can go higher there. Derek Spina, you want to make sure, with Barkley in particular, the layup tendency is lower than the dunk tendency. So say you have the dunk tendency at a 75, standing dunk, driving dunk at a 75, you need to have 30 points or lower for the layup, so that way he doesn't lay the ball up. So say 75-45. So 45% of the time he may lay it up, 75% of the time he's probably going to dunk the ball. You want to make sure you have a scale of used to be 30. I don't know if that's still correct because I haven't checked the dunk tendencies since last year, but it used to be 30 in between the discrepancies of, or in between the categories of layups and dunks and things like that. So, but the drive tendency, particularly here, is how often a player will still try to get to the rim once they're driving. How often they're going to relentlessly hunt that rim. And so a high value here obviously means they're going to keep going until they draw a foul or get to the rim. Low value means they're not really going to try that much and they might pass out of a shot. Glass is self-explanatory, how often they use the glass on a layup or a drive. Step through is how often they're going to step through on a shot. That's self-explanatory. Driving layup, like I said, these categories here from driving layup all the way through alley-oop here have to be scaled within each other. So the layups and the type of layups here, along with floaters, all have to be scaled with the dunk tendencies. The scale for the dunk tendencies is it's 0 for minimum. It is 40 for the average, and then I believe if they still have it the same, it's 80 or higher for anybody that's an elite dunker, as far as driving dunks or standing dunks on each category. Some players still have this 99, but that's just to make sure that they do standing dunks more so than anything else. I personally look at the floater as like a little push shot now because they changed the kind of animation a little bit. So it's good that Harrell has this because he has a little push shot that he likes to throw up every once in a while that could be utilized as a push shot, but it's more like under the floater category. Looking at alley-oop, this is how often there's two alley-oop tendency spots. This alley-oop is how often they're going to catch the alley-oop off of a pass. Put back, self-explanatory. How often you're going to put back a shot on an offensive rebound. Crash tendency is how often a player is going to drive in and get knocked to the ground. And then drive right is how often they drive right versus left. The triple threat I explained earlier, you want to make sure that's working alongside whether you're somebody that goes from the triple threat. Like Carmelo is a jab, step, shoot. So obviously his jab, step, and shot tendency would be high versus pump, fake, and idle. As you can see here, you don't want to have idle for guards. You want to have that at 0 because they need to do something in the triple threat, whether it's jab, step, or shooting the ball a lot. I don't know many guards per se that are going to jack up lots of shots that are role players out of the triple threat. So usually these will be at like 5 or 0 or maybe even 10. Whereas high volume guys in the triple threat, like a Tyrese Maxey, would be high up in this category. Size up, they reworked those this year. They haven't really input the tendencies per se, everybody, for the size up. So that's a to be determined how those should be scaled. I have to do some more testing with that. Hesitation and no setup. These have been like revamped from a coding standpoint, from my understanding. The crossovers and stuff here. If you're a player like Montrezl Harrell, you don't want to have any of this stuff as a big. You want to make sure that the no dribble move is at a 99. So that way they just get the ball, go, and dunk, or whatever the case is. Heavy dribble guards and stuff like that need to have these assorted based on how often they do each one. Still keep the no dribble move tendency around 75 or so, just so they're not dribbling the clock out, and then there's no finish to anything, and it messes up the AI. So you want to make sure you pair that accordingly. Guys like Shake Milton should be knocked down to like a 90 or an 85, just so they perform those moves if need be. Now, this is one that a lot of people ask questions about: attack strong on drive versus dish to the open man. You got to make sure these are within 20 to 30 Depending on the player, you've got to play with them because you don't want to put pass to the open man too high because then they'll never shoot the ball, and you don't want to put attack strong on finish for guards too high because then they'll never pass the ball. You've got to find the right balance of what works. For bigs, you want to make sure obviously finish is 80 or above, and then the pass out, unless there's somebody that passes a ton like Jokic or guys like that, then you want to make sure that they have a lower value here for dish to the open man to make sure that they constantly finish when getting to the rim. I don't like flashy pass for any bigs unless they're a big time passing big. Usually reserve that for guards and passing guards at that. That's just my personal preference. I usually knock it down. That cuts down a lot of unnecessary turnovers. Alley-oop pass, as I mentioned earlier, this is how often this player will throw the alley-oop to an AI player or whatever the case may be in the game for gameplay purpose. Roll versus pop, the lower the value to 0, 0 is they won't ever roll to the rim. So that's for guards, point guards, shooting, wings, things like that. And then the 95 to 99 is pretty much they're going to roll every time. They don't hardly ever shoot. Spot up versus cut and transition. The higher this value is, the more often they're going to shoot a 3. The lower the value is means they're going to get to the rim, cut to the rim constantly. Isolation stats. This is how often your player will isolate the AI opponent. You want to make sure that these are scaled appropriately to get ISOs for high ISO players and things like that. If a player doesn't really ISO hardly at all, I like to knock these down to 0 in most of the categories. Unless playing a poor player, I put them at like 5, just so they have some kind of value there. Play discipline. So they haven't really scaled these. Excuse me. They haven't really scaled these much since, or rescaled these much over the past few years. But the lower the play discipline, the higher chance that they're going to break out of that play and kind of do their own thing. The higher the play discipline, the higher that particular player is going to stick to the play ran. Post up is obvious. It's how often a player is going to post up. Post back down. The highest I go in this category is 50, and that's for elite, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar elite. That's why you see Embiid here is perfect at a 40 because it's something that he's going to do, but he also does that face-up mid-range as well. So I didn't want to put everything down at back down. These are all the ones I talked about earlier. The individual moves, I don't like to go over 25 unless they're proficient in that particular move. And then I do top end 50 for these moves if that's something they really, really excel at. And then shoot from the post tendency I talked about as well. So that's those. And then we get to the kind of defensive stats. And with that, like your take charge, anybody like a Ersan Ilyasova that takes a ton of charges, you'd want to have that value high. Otherwise, don't have it super high because that way, if you have it super high, it messes with gameplay, and then you can't pretty much get anything off that's not going to be called a foul. Foul tendency is how often you're going to get, foul within a game, obviously. Hard fouls, how often you're going to knock players down and be aggressive. Pass interceptions, how often steals get ripped on passes in game. You can tweak these to your liking. Personally, I found in my testing 95 is the top tier threshold, and then 0 is the absolute bar minimum. They don't do anything. And then contest, if you want to have a good defensive team, you need to make sure that the contest tendency is up here if a player is rated high enough in that category. If a player is a poor defender, like a Trae Young, his contest is probably going to be a lot lower on this scale than obviously a 45 or things like that. It could be like a 30 if he's not really contesting anything. So I hope that cleared up everything as far as tendencies. Like I said, there was a tendency update over a week ago that updated some teams' tendencies. How I know that is the Hawks now have touch tendency of 90 for DeJounte Murray. And so they were updating along the way to get players kind of fixed here and there based on particular players having good starts to the season, bad starts, things like that. So still a long way to go, but at least they got some updates in and are showing that they're working on that. But hope everybody enjoyed this explanation of the tendencies. Got to see the updates that 2K did for this season. I'm sure they'll update again as the year goes on. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, like it. Go ahead and like it now. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll have more 2K23 content coming out as more updates drop. So hope everybody has a good rest of your day. Thanks for watching and take care.